Hi, I'm Christina with Tinagirl Travels. Thanks for joining me in my office. I'm on my way to work this morning, and I thought it would be a great time to just chat about the 5 things you need to do before you hit buy on the internet to book a trip. Okay, so these things might seem like they're a little bit obvious, but it's funny because it's actually it's something that's either happened to me, almost happened to me, or definitely happened to other people I know. So it's worth just going over these things and having it as kind of a checklist for before you book your trip. So the first thing you want to make sure is that you have a passport, and that your passport is valid for 6 months after you return from your trip. So if you're cutting it close and your passport still has 4 months left and you think you're going to slip that little holiday in before the end of your, validation of your passport, think again. A lot of countries won't let you in unless your passport is valid for at least 6 months from the last day of your trip. Okay, so keep that in mind. The other thing is, if you just got a new passport, you need to remember to sign that passport, because if you arrive at customs and you're trying to get into a country and your passport isn't signed, it is not a valid document. So you want to make sure that you signed your passport. Okay, that almost happened to a young fellow that was traveling with us on our last trip. So, and luckily we caught it before we got up to customs. And luckily I had a pen with me. That's another thing. Okay, this little sidebar. Just always throw a pen in your carry-on baggage. You'll need it several times to fill out all those little forms and things. Okay, but that was just a little bonus one there. Okay, so your second thing before you click buy on for your trip is to make sure that your country doesn't require visas that you can't get. Okay, so what I mean by that, and I'm gonna link for Canada and the US, the websites that you would check for the country that you want to go to. And the reason I say this is because sometimes I do things like I go online, I go on Google Flights. That's one of my favorite websites to use. And I will plunk in my dates. And then what I do is I pull up their map and I check the whole world to see what the prices are for my dates. And so sometimes I'll see things like Shanghai, China, for instance. So there'll be a flight from my city to Shanghai, China, and it'll only be like $700. I think, okay, that's great, because I always try to get my flights under $1,000 to wherever we go. And but the problem is, so me and my husband, $700 plus the visa, and the visa for that country, for Canada, for Canadians, is $140 or something like that, and it's also a $150 processing fee. So we're up at almost $600 on top of our airline tickets. It is a 10-year visa, but how many times am I going to go to China, right? So if I'm going often, it's worth it, but if it's going to be one trip, I might want to look at something else. The third thing you want to make sure about is that you have the time off work. And as silly as that sounds, okay, I'm guilty for this. I sit there, I find a good deal, and I'm like, I'm going to book this. Okay, but then all of a sudden reality hits me and I go, ooh, I got to see if I can get that time off work. Not only that, but I want to make sure that I have a buffer day or two on the end of my trip if I'm going overseas, because when I come back, I don't feel well. I am jet lagged. I feel my head is in the clouds, and I need a day at least at home to try and catch up. I don't find that when I go to my location, but when I come home, I'm always severely jet lagged. So make sure you get that time off, and make sure you get it off well before you book your trip, so you're not looking at dates and then losing that period of time. Like recently that happened to me, where I actually found business class tickets from my city in Canada all the way to Istanbul, Turkey, for a ridiculous price, and by the time I got home and tried to arrange the time off, they were gone. So you want to have your dates set. The next thing you want to make sure about is let's say you find a deal like to Iceland. Iceland's a good one for this. So you find a screaming deal to Iceland and you're about ready to book it. But what you want to do before you do that is check how much the hotels are there, because Iceland can be very cheap to get to, and it's their kind of country promotion. They're really trying to promote tourism in their country, which is awesome. But the hotels cost almost as much as your flight. Hotels will run you $300 to $400, even $500 a night in Iceland, depending on when you're going to go. So that's not a deal anymore if you book, say, 3 or 4 days there, and all of a sudden you have $2,000 in hotel room fees. So you want to look at that. That is definitely something to consider. And the last thing that you need to consider is the cost of the country. And so you can find that out online as well, and I will post a couple of websites down below that you can check, and you can just Google it, cost of traveling to this country, and so it gives you an idea. And the reason I tell you this, like, if you haven't figured it out already, my husband and I travel quite a bit, and we like to be frugal travelers. We want to get the best bang for our buck. So what we want to do is make sure that when we get to this country, we can actually afford to enjoy our time there. So I'll give you an example of that. We went to Switzerland and we spent just a couple of nights there. It was part of our last summer's trip through Europe. And I'm really glad it was our last stop, and I'm glad we only had 2 nights there, because the cost of Zurich, Switzerland was astronomical. And so I'll give you an example. I'll buy a Starbucks cup of tea here. It cost me $2.35. I get a spare tea bag on the side, one in, one out kind of thing. And in Switzerland, it's not like that. That same cup of tea with 1 tea bag, $8.80. So that's worth thinking about when you're going to a country, because that can kind of wreck your trip. Whereas when we go to Turkey, and that's a place we love going, you open a menu at a restaurant and you can afford everything on that menu, and you go home with a suitcase full of wonderful souvenirs, and it's just a great place to visit. So keep that in mind when you're booking your trip, because that can kind of make or break your trip, and you don't want to come home and be like, oh geez, I didn't buy anything and all we had was a couple of meals, and it was hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So you definitely want to look into that. So thank you so much for tuning in today to my YouTube channel and watching Tinagirl Travels. And I just encourage you to hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you on my next video. Thanks for tuning in.